There is no strongest coffee in the world. It doesn't exist. And that's probably a confusing thing for me to say, because if you're interested in coffee, you've probably been served an ad by a company offering you the strongest coffee in the world. I'm here to say it's not, and it doesn't exist. And I should explain myself. Turns out we use the word strength in a really confusing way. In fact, we use it 4 different ways. And I would argue only one of those is correct. And so today we're going to go through each of the ways that we use the word strength, understand it a little bit more, learn from it a little bit more. And at the end of it, I think you'll understand how I can claim that there is no strongest coffee in the world. Now, I have here a bag of coffee from one of the many brands claiming to sell the strongest coffee in the world. I have pixelated and blurred it because, having looked into it, mostly they're very small companies. Often they don't even roast themselves. And I'm not here to be mean to someone else's business just because I sort of disagree with their marketing. What's inside the bag, though, I think is a pretty good example of what you're typically being sold with these kind of coffees. Let's have a look. This coffee is a pretty dark roasted Robusta coffee. That's the species Robusta, and what you'll tend to find is that Robusta, broadly speaking, has about twice the caffeine content of Arabica, because the first way that we use the word strength is to talk about caffeine content. The more caffeine it has, the stronger it is. And I kind of understand where they're going with that, but caffeine's not as simple as you want it to be. Now, caffeine is pretty water-soluble, so you'd think however much is in the ground coffee should end up in the cup, but confusingly it doesn't always seem to be that way. You'll see loads of studies where they go out and buy drinks from different coffee shops and they report the caffeine content in there, and they're really variable in kind of a surprising way. But broadly speaking, the amount of caffeine in your cup of coffee will correlate to how much was in the beans to start with, and then how effectively you've extracted it from there. But only part of that really is intrinsic to the coffee itself. And yes, Robusta has on average twice the caffeine content, but it can be more, it can be less. Very rarely do I see anyone reporting a kind of milligrams of caffeine per kilo or per gram of coffee on the bags. I think most people are just saying, oh, it's Robusta, it's twice the caffeine. Yes, this is very strong. I guess we should brew this up. So we've got a cup of coffee with, I suspect, a good amount of caffeine in it. But, there's certainly ways to brew coffee where you might get more out. I think longer steeps, for example, would probably be more effective. Something like a very long French press brew or like a super long AeroPress brew if you're desperate for full access to caffeine. But here's the thing. You can buy caffeine in pill form. If you're desperate for caffeine, there are much gentler ways to consume it. You can have the cup of coffee that you want and just take a caffeine pill if that's your kind of requirement. As for whether caffeine is a good idea or not, well, we made a video all about caffeine. I'll leave it linked up here and in the description down below. You can make up your own mind about how much caffeine you should be consuming. Now, the second way that we use strength in this kind of scenario is one that you've seen on the front of a bag of coffee. In fact, we made a video about this as well, about buying coffee and understanding what the labels mean. Often you'll see a strength rating on a bag of coffee. And again, that's kind of back to an intrinsic quality of the coffee. And really what they're saying there is not strength, they're giving you roast level. So a strength 5 will be a very dark roast, a strength 2 will be a very light roast. It's nothing really to do with the word strength. It's a completely inappropriate use of the word strength, but it's a sort of nice way for sort of supermarkets and others to talk about roast level in a way that doesn't involve the complexities of trying to describe the color of a coffee bean. Now, that shorthand on the outside of a bag really is shorthand for the third way that we use strength, which is kind of intensity of bitterness. Let's go with that. Like, you might sip a coffee that's incredibly bitter and say, ugh, too strong, I don't like it. And that's a very sort of good word for communicating what you like or don't like, but it's actually not quite the correct word. The idea should be that, oh, that's too bitter, that's too harsh, that tastes burnt, that tastes bad, but too strong actually is talking about something else. This coffee is a pretty dark roast of Robusta, which itself typically has higher levels of bitterness. So this cup tastes very bitter. but it would be incorrect of me to say this cup tastes very strong. But all of this brings us to the sort of final usage of the word strength, the one that I think is the correct usage, the one that certainly we use here on this channel. And I'm going to give you a sort of more in-depth explanation of why it's important to use that term strength, and actually how it's really useful to understand it when it comes to better coffee brewing every day. All of that will come after a short ad from this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. If you need a website or a domain, then I would recommend Squarespace. They make it so easy. It doesn't really matter what it is you want to make. It could be a website for your cafe, it could be a portfolio of your work, it could be an e-commerce store. It's all built right into Squarespace. You start with one of their beautiful templates, and that means that it's going to look great on every device, every browser, and you begin to fill it with your words, your images, your ideas, your product. It could be anything. And once it's up and it's live, there's nothing really to take care of, nothing to patch or upgrade or install. It's going to look beautiful from that point onwards. As I always say, don't take my word for it. Click the link down below and sign up for a free trial. Explore, build, create something. And when you're ready to launch, use code James Hoffmann for 10% off any website or domain. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So the true definition of strength in coffee, the true meaning, the true understanding, really is trying to answer the question of how much of this cup is water and how much is dissolved ground coffee. And that tells me essentially how strong the cup is. If you drink alcohol, you'll be familiar with the idea of strength from an alcohol perspective. On the side of a beer or a glass of wine or a bottle of whiskey, you'll see a percentage of alcohol. That tells you how strong it is. How much of this shot of whiskey is ethanol? Might be 40% booze, and you understand how strong that is. If it's a glass of wine, it might be 10, 12, 14. The percentage makes sense of the strength in a very neat, easy way. You can do exactly the same thing with a cup of coffee. You can use a little device to calculate what percentage of this cup is dissolved ground coffee. Typically speaking, a filter coffee will be anywhere from 1 to 1.5% strength as a kind of ballpark. It will vary, and as I said, there's no right answer there. But that's the kind of rough strength that you'll find in filter coffee. Espresso is more like 8 to 12%, somewhere there. So nothing really gets past wine levels of strength. Now, the way we calculate strength these days is to use a refractometer. These are devices that you put a sample of coffee onto the little readout here, and you push a button, and it calculates the refractive index. Now, any liquid will have a refractive index. It's essentially the speed of light through that liquid, but being overly simplistic probably doesn't help. Then a coffee focus refractometer will take the refractive index, do a little bit of mathematics, a little bit of algorithmic work, and spit out a percentage strength of coffee. You can't measure coffee's strength with a typical refractometer that isn't built for coffee because it doesn't do the algorithmic conversion to a percentage strength specific for the beverage. There's a couple of these on the market. The pioneering model was from VST, which is this one here. A guy called Vince Fideli did it. Fundamentally changed the coffee brewing game forever by allowing us to understand how strong a cup of coffee was in a really accurate way. Why is that important? That's a very good question, because on its own, strength isn't actually particularly useful. I could measure the strength of this cup of coffee, and I could taste it, and I could say, ooh, it tastes bad, and the strength is this, therefore that strength is bad, but that's not the way it works. And in fact, if I dilute this down, the quality of this cup of coffee is the same, the flavors that it has are the same, but it is now a weaker cup. So strength on its own is actually not that important. What it is, though, is a point of preference. How strong you like your coffee is down to you. There's no right answer in the world of strength. Once you work out what strength you like, you can kind of work out how much coffee you should use to get to that strength. But if you know how much of this cup is coffee, essentially, or dissolved coffee, and you know how big the cup of coffee is, or what the mass of the coffee is, then as long as you know how much coffee you started with, you can calculate extraction. Now, that seems immediately a little bit confusing, so I'll go with a different sort of practical example. I pulled 2 double shots of espresso. I dosed 20 grams in each time, and I pulled about 40 grams out each time. In the end, I had about 80 grams of liquid that went into a dehydrator, and then the 2 spent pucks that started as being 20 grams each, they went into a dehydrator. And this is kind of how it used to work, though they really only used to focus on the spent pucks of coffee and not so much the liquid. Let's see what we get at the end of that. So I've got 2 pucks. These would have weighed 40 grams in total to start with. Obviously, when you freshly brewed them, they've got quite a lot of water inside them, so you can't really tell how much coffee you got out. But if we weigh them now, stack them up, they now weigh 32.4 grams. So you can say if I started with 40 grams and I got 32.4 grams, then I took out 7.6 grams in terms of my extraction. That's how much dissolved coffee was taken from this puck and put into the cup that would be consumed. If you divide 7.6 by 40, or you turn it into a percentage, you've got 19%. So you would say that I've extracted 19% of the ground coffee. Now, historically, there were guidelines on the desired level of extraction. It was said to be sort of 18 to 22% was the good range for coffee brewing. What we've found more recently is that we've been able to take that number higher and higher and higher using different techniques, different grinders, a whole bunch of other stuff without it tasting bad. But in many scenarios, 18 to 22% is a good starting point in this whole thing. So on a kind of technical level, these were good brews. Not incredible, not bad, but kind of fine. This is what we extracted. And what we've made here is possibly the world's worst instant coffee. This is kind of what instant coffee is, except you don't dehydrate it in a hot environment. Instant coffee is freeze-dried to concentrate it. As a result, you end up with a much nicer looking end product that doesn't taste nearly as bad. This has just been cooked dry and would be completely disgusting. It's sort of, I'll see if I can, oh yeah. But all of this here is basically, yeah, it's basically instant coffee. Don't drink this. I presume it would taste completely terrible. You would assume this would taste terrible. I mean, it will taste terrible. I'm going to have to taste it, aren't I? I don't know whether to turn it into a cup of coffee or just to eat it. This has been cooked for 2 days. This was an espresso, cooked for 2 days, dried out. Oh no. It's disgusting. But it also really tastes like Marmite or Vegemite. Like it really, very savory. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Why am I doing this? This is not the point of this video. Look, kids, if you make your own instant coffee, use a freeze dryer. Don't dehydrate it in a small dehydrator. That's disgusting. I'll wrap up as I recover from that. Why is this important? Well, very simply, I use the term strength quite a lot. I'll talk about strength, the impact of different grinders or brew methods on strength, and then extraction too. And I did think it was time to make a video discussing that and explaining that in a little bit more detail, explaining refractometers, explaining the kind of mechanics of extraction in a way. By using strength in a whole host of different ways, I think it's actually really confusing and frustrating. If I took, let's say, a light roast of a decaf coffee and I brewed it at a really high ratio, or I pulled a shot of it, right? That would be low strength because it's a light roast, according to the kind of strength rating. It would be low strength because it's decaf, it's got no caffeine in it. It would be low strength because it probably wouldn't taste particularly bitter as an espresso, but it would probably be about 10% strength as a beverage, which means it would be really strong. So it's strong, but it's not. And that, to me, just is ridiculous. It's unhelpful, it's confusing, and I wanted to create a little bit of clarity and try and use the words appropriately in future videos and just help you understand the world of coffee a little bit more. But now I want to hear from you. Which aspect of strength doesn't make sense still? Are you frustrated by the fact that people use strength in all of these different weird ways? Have you tried something claiming to be the strongest coffee in the world? Did you eat it raw as whole beans? Because that's really the only way to have it be truly the strongest possible cup. Anyway, let me know down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.